as evolved as we are, we're going to find, I would predict, organisms who've got two eyes at the front to allow you stereoscopic vision. You would have eyes which are designed, which can detect the wavelengths of light from an upper end to a lower end, which is optimal to the organism's survival. You said something about, was it Taylor, who thought we have to assume that our sense organs are perfect?
We have to assume that they're accurate machines.
If they're not perfect, then you can't have a perfect designer. So we have limited hearing. We have an upper and a lower range because it equips us to cope with the environment in which we live.
Right.
Had it demanded that we needed to be able to hear higher frequencies, then that would have happened. It's almost certain that it would have happened by an evolutionary natural selection process. And same with what's reality? We are just absorbing information and interpreting. Probably less than 5% of what we see as reality actually is real, if you like, and most of it we ignore. But you can't hear the ticking clock.
Okay.
Can you?
Yes.
In fact, just on that.
But it's not designed to
Wait, hold on. Let him speak, then you can speak.
So I was just responding to him, to his point.
The interesting point here, of course, is that we know that a large part of what we believe we're seeing, we're not actually seeing. The brain, they can do experiments to show that the brain is actually filled in. So when I'm looking at you against the wall, it's a bit like the way the video works on the internet. Everything that's static, you kind of take it in once, it kind of stores it and you don't worry about it, and just concentrate on the bits that are changing that you need to worry about, which means that things can change without you actually realising it when there's experiments to show that you can be deceived about what you're actually seeing.
Well, Taylor would say to that the concept of deception is only possible if we have an idea of what it would mean not to be deceived, which comes from the sum total of our experiences having visual perceptions of things. And what did you want to say? No, behind you.
Well, I was going to make a similar argument to this gentleman here, in as much as so there would have been instances of sensory organs which were not working effectively. You could have a whole range of organisms with sensory organs which are working more or less effectively. It's simply that the ones that work less effectively die out and the ones that are working more effectively survive. So it's not that all the sensory organs are perfect all the time, it's just that if your sensory organs ain't much good, then you don't survive.
Right. So you think that the reason we know that the sensory organs are good enough to trust them is because if they didn't exist, that would be evidence that they were not good enough to exist and they would die out?
Well, if they weren't good enough, then you wouldn't survive as an organism, and other organisms would take over, or other mutations of your particular organism would take over.
Could incredibly bad sensory organs still exist because they allow you to see enough?
Yes.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
You've got plenty of evidence of that. You can show in the fossil record of animals that have actually de-evolved, if you like. In other words, if they may have been circus animals, if they move underground, in fact I think the mole is an example, they no longer need their eyes, and over generations they lose their eyesight and they become actually possibly simpler animals, and if you like evolve more or less back towards the worm.
Interesting. Do you think that's happening to us?
Well, could
yes.
There's no reason to believe that evolution is always an onward progression, or that intelligence is necessarily something that is a good idea in terms of evolutionary survival. It's very expensive in terms of the energy required to looking after our brains, and also in terms of how long you have to look after your offspring before they can be released to look after themselves.
Interesting. Yes.
Yeah, I worked with visually impaired children for 20 odd years. The impression became clear to me that vision is not so much a visual process, but it's also very much a cognitive process.
Right.
So, for instance, I know a blind man who I saw as a child who is a very good jazz player. He's never seen anything, but once he was in front of a keyboard, he can do it. It struck me as quite interesting that his mobility is very poor, but if he's there around, I think he's okay. And I work quite often with used to work quite often with partially sighted young people, and the same thing became clear to me that vision is as much a cognitive process, in other words, understanding what you got, as it is a visual process.
Interesting. Do you think that that claim that you've made is in any way dependent on your eyes being accurate?
Well, I don't know. I've read some claim myself, but I mean, yeah, I mean, you can get by with a very degraded image, as long as your brain can put the visual clues together.
Interesting. So your sight doesn't actually have to be that accurate in order for you to be able to make lots of claims about what's out there, or even how vision works.
Well, you can get away with it.
Interesting. Yes?
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly evidence that domesticated animals, including human beings, are becoming less intelligent because it's actually better in an evolutionary terms to be less intelligent because you're less likely to, disrupt the system that's there. So a sheep that's just happy to sit in the field all day is a better sheep and will be selected for by humans, and the same with people. The people who are violent and who disrupt society will be shunned and leave less offspring. So yes, evolution can work in all sorts of directions, not necessarily just an upward direction, whatever upward is.
So I suppose what Taylor would say to you at this point is, how much of your senses being accurate are you dependent on to be able to make claims like that?
Yeah, but
some number, I suppose. I mean, whatever percentage it is.
Why would that imply that you need design? We've evolved to be able to think in the way we do, because within the environment that we've evolved in, it's a criteria that enhances our ability to survive. So I can't see why you need design as a rationale for, if you like, intellect.
Well, Taylor would say not that our sense organs are perfect. He would probably agree with a lot of the comments that are being made about the potential foibles of seeing and hearing, even evolutionary foibles. So what he would say is, in order for them to be good enough to be able to do this thing called science to any level, in order for them to be that good, even if that's not great, we need to assume that they are designed, because only designed objects are the kinds of objects that we have any experience of giving us accurate metaphysical information about stuff outside of us.
But when it comes to accuracy, we don't actually use our senses, I would suggest, to get accuracy. We actually design tools and evolve them, because if you take the initial tools we built, they were very primitive, but what we did, we've gradually become better and better, and one tool enables us to produce a better tool, and that better tool enables us to produce an even better one. You look at the way we've taken forward microprocessors.
Right.
But all of that is not contingent on any individual's ability to do things accurately. It's really been, if you like, a societal progression. In other words, if you look at science, it will not work if you've only got 1, 2 or 3 people. You may be able to evolve things, but to get to the complexity of the science that we have, you need millions of people interacting.
Do you think science could have evolved without sight and hearing?
No.
Then that's what Taylor would say. That level of sight and hearing is what we have to trust, gives us information of things metaphysically outside of us, and we only have evidence of things being able to do that for us when those things are designed, if they're physical objects. Yes.
So, from what you're saying, I would agree with Taylor's argument, with the proviso that evolution itself can be a sufficient designer without the need for any deity or that kind of stuff. Evolution itself is a sufficient designer.
Okay, so you're in direct contrast with
It's natural selection, actually, not evolution.
Oh, evolution by natural selection.
Just go back to my original statement. Evolution is not directed. It does not have purpose. all it has is a product of an interaction between the environment and natural selection. We cannot say we are the way we are because some guy down the back, way down there somewhere, has directed it. It's just not true. And you've only got to look at adaptive radiation within the Galapagos Islands of Darwin's finches. You made a comment about, do we show regression? We do. There's a phenomenon called neoteny.
Mm-hmm.
Neoteny is, we no longer develop a full coat of body hair. That's a regression to what our ancestors did.
Mm-hmm.
We no longer, there is a process in development where the head is turned to right angles, so it's like that.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you're a four-legged animal, you need your face pointing forwards.
Right.
But if you're going to be two-legged, you don't want that stage to happen. So that no longer happens in development. So we have, we have gone backwards in some respect to what other animals have achieved through evolutionary purpose. But that's because it's to our advantage to have those things happen.
Okay, well, I suppose what Taylor would say in response to that is he would say, look, if evolution is in any way predictable, that is, if you can predict that something will happen based on something else, that means evolution has a plan, which means that evolution, by definition, is kind of designer. Disagree? Agree?
Well, evolution is predictable if you know all of the environmental effects that are going to cause that evolution. It becomes fairly predictable as to if you've got certain criteria, what will happen if you start from an existing base. It won't be precise, but it'll work in that way.
Yeah, Taylor would probably say that if there was no predictability, that could be a way of saying evolution is not a designer. But as long as we know that if X happens, Y will happen to some degree over time, that means evolution has a plan.
No, it doesn't. You can't say that there is a purpose. You can't say, I know what the end product's going to be. You can't say that with evolution.
Oh, he would agree. But he would say as long as there is somewhere written in, or as long as there is information somewhere to the effect that if X happens, Y will happen over time, that means evolution has a design plan. Yes?
About whether we could have done the things that we do without sight or hearing or smell, and we have to remember that our vision is actually very imperfect. You compare it to a hawk. A hawk can sort of see a mouse in the sort of next feet.
Oops, sorry.
If you're talking about hearing, a dog can hear a wasp 50 yards away. Or if we're talking about smells, then a moth can pick up certain smells when there's only a few molecules available. Yet these creatures haven't managed to evolve to develop the same tools that we have.
Right. Taylor would probably say that that's because they have different cognitive faculties to what we do. But he would say that those cognitive faculties that we have would still not have been able to create science if we didn't have hearing and tasting and seeing that was accurate enough to tell us that there really is stuff out there that looks and sounds the way that it looks and sounds. Yes?
I'm interested that Taylor decided to take on the evolutionary theory and argue against that, when we all in this room seem to be on the side of the, on Darwin's side. I'm interested that he chose that argument rather than going back a stage and saying, well, the physical world, chemistry, the laws of chemistry and the structure of atoms and the laws of physics all seem to show a great deal of possibly design. There's lots of constants, there isn't just random matter, everything is governed by rules, basically. Mm-hmm. And I'm surprised that he's taken this tack and attacked Darwin, who seems to be very well established, instead of going back a stage and looking at the building blocks, which, I mean, evolutionary, the process of evolution had millions of years. All the laws of physics, as far as I understand, were kind of created at the start of the Big Bang in a less than a microsecond.
Yeah,
I'm surprised he didn't use that argument, which I think would be much more difficult for us to put down.
Well, the reason he doesn't do that argument is because there are millions of teleological arguments that rely on the anthropic principle. They're quite fashionable. But what makes his argument unique is that he's not saying there's order in the universe, therefore it must be explained by God. He's saying the only way that we can know that there's order in the universe is because we have these gadgets in us that have to work to some degree. And in order to assume that they work at all, we have to assume that there is some kind of design in them, even if the design itself could be evolution. So he's not even necessarily anti-Darwin. He's just describing evolution as one possible designer. Yes?
I think, I don't know if we're getting it wrong, you see. I don't see us as being the peak, the pinnacle of evolution.
Mhm.
Just one organism amongst millions and millions of different types.
Mhm.
We are not evolution. The purpose of evolution hasn't been to create intelligent life. It's an accident. And we have been able to take what we needed to survive in the environments in which we were living in, has allowed certain aspects of thinking and such like to be developed. And incredibly, far more than I think I nearly said evolution ever intended. But that's totally wrong, of course. But we've been able to capitalise on some of those advantages that we've had. And by being social, by being collective, we've been able to understand much more of the universe. And could I say, on the anthropic principle, all those constants you talk about, it's obvious. In a multiverse, well, you're only going to have life in the universe which has the right constants to support life. I mean, if there are other billions of universes out there, then most of them are not.
That's a big if.
But
I agree with you.
But should it only be a universe? And there is plenty of physicists that would argue that there are alternative possible universes there. And it's an evolving argument.
Okay. So let's go back to vision and hearing. Do you think the vision and hearing of humans is good enough to do science?
Well, yes, because we've done it.
No, I don't. Well,
No, it's not good enough.
It's good enough connection.
Yes.
Very good.
Okay, hold on, we'll go with you, and then you. Go ahead.
It's very good. There were some people in Africa, a small nation called the Dogon. It turned out they knew that Sirius had a companion star called Sirius B. Did not know that before, and they could prove they knew it already. They were doing brilliant naked eye astronomy, and we're quite good at naked eye astronomy.
Yeah, that's an important point. I mean, there are things that the Aztecs discovered hundreds of years before Western science using naked eye astronomy. So different humans use different scientific methods and sometimes come up with discoveries that are way ahead of other humans in other places of the world. But the question is our vision and our hearing good enough to do science at all? And if you answer yes, can you give an explanation of how they're that good without them being designed? Yes?
Some people say, I don't know what it is, but there's only less light. There's no such thing as dark. Or the devil, you could say, or God. God is light, devil is dark. There's no such thing as the devil. No such thing as dark. There's only less light. So when we look into the light, God is behind it, or whatever the design or whatever is behind it, flashing it into our eyes. We can't see it. We can't see beyond it. The eyes are not good enough for that, because it will just burn the eye. It will just burn your eyes. You can't get beyond it. You can never quite get it. So different shades of light reveal things to us. Different shades of light reveal things. And some people, perception, how they perceive it, can perceive it better than others. That itself might be evolutionary. I don't know. Some people can see these things.
So our perceptions are better or worse depending on what context they happen in and who's having them? Did you agree with that?
Yeah. I don't know.
Okay. What did you want to say to that?
If I rewind a few minutes, I think you said that Taylor might be prepared to accept the notion that the design is evolution.
Yes.
Okay, so if that is the case, then it doesn't take us to any idea of God. We've got the design. Yes, it's evolution. It doesn't have to include God at all. So in what way does that argument lead us to God in any way?
Well, he doesn't say that it must be God. Sorry, he doesn't say that it must be evolution that is designer. The point is it could be evolution or it could be God. But what it does bring us to is even if it's just evolution, it's an understanding of evolution as being a designer, which goes against a lot of what people think to be evolution. I mean, we've seen some of that even in this room. A lot of people think evolution is necessarily undesigning, whereas Taylor thinks it's designing. And if you think that evolution is a kind of designer, that certainly makes it easier to do other kinds of theistic arguments, because then you have to explain, okay, we have this thing in the world that designs things over time. Why is that thing there? Why is it designing in the way that it's designing? And that leads to God, according to Taylor. But you don't have to take the argument that far. All it's attempting to show in this form is that our sense organs, if we believe them to be accurate, must be designed. Yes?
An interesting point, of course, is that many animals have, as I've already pointed out, better vision, better, they can make better sounds. Well, they can't understand it, but the point about human beings, because probably dolphins and elephants are just as intelligent as we are, is that we've got the forefinger and these hands that can make tools which we can then use our vision and other faculties to measure very precisely, and of course our communication. We've got a very highly developed form of communication between the individuals, so that we form very powerful groups. We're probably more anomalous to termites than to many other animals when you look at it, humanity, if you like, as a body in itself.
Mm-hmm. So are you saying that human knowledge is more of a collective project than a product of individuals doing any kind of intellectual work?
But our real power, because we've been, we can't really claim we're successful. We've only really been around in a technological sense, agricultural sense, really for only about probably 50,000 years, where we moved from hunter-gatherer. If you look at it in terms of technological, industrial sense, probably 500 years, at best 2,000. If you look at it in terms of being detectable within the universe, only about 150 years.
Right.
Yeah, that's when we've had the understood radio signals, and it could well be that we're just a freak, and it's unlikely that we'll last very long, which is why we've never, so far, not been able to detect any other signs of intelligent life within the universe. Life may be very common, but intelligent technological life may be very rare and may have a very poor survival record.
Okay. What Taylor would probably ask you is, that explanation you gave, to what extent is it dependent on having accurate seeing and hearing?